Hello everyone, this is Chara. Today I want to do a bit of a competitive overview talking about roles, how they work, and just a bit of information about them. I feel roles are something that's very disputed in this game, and is something that isn't very well understood outside of the bare minimum, and there's not really a lot of places to find to get an introduction into it, so I want to go over a few things in this video and just basically discuss role for roles a little bit. So, the first thing I want to do is cover roles. So, there are 3 different roles in this game. There is the aggro or frontline weapon, generally a slaying heavy weapon with some good mobility, usually responsible for getting kills, flanks, and pushing. These are often the initiators in team fights and run the highest risk of dying to focus on getting key picks to open up fights. These are usually things like Tetras and Tenatech, for example. The next role is a supportive or midline weapon. These weapons are usually something that run the job of being able to have your team be able to control more space. Their job is to secure areas, to stall objective, to hold paint control. It's the hardest one to classify, but the best definition I like to use for it is that it's an enabler and its job is to make everything else easier for your team. Lastly, there is the backline or the anchor role. This is most commonly seen with chargers and other backlines, but they specialize in specifically long-range defensive weapons that have a lot of long-distance pressure, which can force the enemy team out of position, and they tend to be a primary target for Slayer weapons. This is typically where the general understanding of roles ends for most players, and what most people get about roles. So I want to go a bit more in depth here and talk about a bit more roles than you might expect. So let's talk about it for a little bit. Now, the most important concept I want to talk about here is that there are actually multiple ways to play each role. So, the role with by far the most variance is the midline or support role. So I want to talk about that for a little bit first, but I'll branch out to other roles in a second. So excuse me while I rant about it for a little bit. So, if you've seen Tassel, which is a top-level Splatoon league, or any other kind of high-level play, you'll likely see support as something like this. A kind of junior or zap who paints around the map a lot, they throw bomb, they get a lot of the armor special weapon, that kind of thing. It's a pretty well-known form of support. They play off of map control, which gives your team more freedom to move, which leads to getting a lot of specials. Armor is a great special because it's a global special, meaning it can affect your entire team, so like the main weapon, it does well at enabling your teammates. These kind of weapons are generally things that have a lot of freedom to move, they can get a lot of specials, they paint very well, they have good mobility, that kind of thing. They run around painting the map. Now, this is absolutely support. This is the most common form of support, especially in the Western scene, and this is absolutely a valid way to play support. But let me look at another weapon that's a support weapon. So let's take a look at another weapon entirely, actually. And this is Tenebrella. So let's talk about Tenebrella. Tenebrella is another support weapon, but if you look at all the aspects I just mentioned, this one really doesn't have any of the same attributes. Its paint isn't bad, but it's certainly not going to be painting around the map. It has high points for special and for the regular and camo kits, which are the most common, so it's not going to be spamming specials. The specials aren't global specials that help the team, they're mostly just used for itself. And on top of that, the weapon definitely isn't fast. In fact, it's really, really, really slow. So this doesn't fit any of the standard traditional support mechanisms that I've mentioned before. So what exactly is it? It's definitely not a Slayer, because it doesn't just go around rushing people and play for kills. So what is it? Ten is a type of support I'd like to introduce, which I typically tend to call zoners. Its job is to make your team's job easier, just like any other support, but it does it in a different way. In this case, Tent does it by taking and controlling space. What Tent does have is a very high HP shield and a one-shot if you get close enough, which means it's very threatening. If I have like a charger set up somewhere over here, I can move up with the Tent shield. I might not kill them, but I'm going to force them to do either one of two things. Either they're going to have to ignore me, move out of position, in which they have less space to fight, which makes it easier for my team to push. They fight me, which requires a team effort, and I take away resources. Or they try to do some mixed combination, in which they're both wasting resources and losing position. Either way, I make my job easier for my team. There are other support weapons with the same aspect. Regular Brellas are a very more similar thing about holding space that can distract a few weapons, but they can also play off the fact that they can't be 1v1'd by a lot of weapons in the game. So if you have Umbrella, say, holding a position, that front line can no longer push that position by themselves. They either need to invest resources or pair together. Umbrella can stall out engagements in 2v1s. So it could be very good at stalling for time. Rapid Blaster is another common example. Rapid Blaster can play off of controlling space. It has a blast radius and a strong fire rate, so it's hard to rush it down and it can peek around corners. It also has Torpedo in this case for some good damage, but other rapid kits have similar things. This is a kind of zoning support because you can't rush it down very easily, and it can control spaces around corners, preventing people from peeking. These weapons can still definitely get kills. I'm not saying that they don't get kills. A lot of support weapons are actually able to get some kills, but their primary job is controlling space and making it easier for your team. And what I said a support is something that allows your team to have an easier job. So overall, that's what it is. There are also hybrids of this. For example, I think one of the best hybrids of support that's both kind of a zoner and a painter, if I can find it with this kit sorting shenanigans. Let's see, what sub? Is Blob. Now, Blob fits into both categories. It has good paint, and it has a global special that it can spam, but it also puts a lot of distance and has bouncing shots, so in a lot of ways it can zone and also limit positions. So this is a kind of hybrid. In some situations it can zone, in some situations it can paint and support. It's a little bit of both. It comes with its downsides and upsides, but this is a kind of hybrid of support. So that's the kind of difference between it. Let's talk about this for another role, just to get the understanding across. Let's talk about Slayers. So I'm just going to draw the comparison between two weapons. Tenatech and Carbon are both Slayers, but Tenatech's difference is it's more self-sufficient. It can paint for itself better, and it's less dependent on other teammates. It can paint the map a bit better, so it has a bit more allowing to move on its own, and it can generally play more solo. So it's definitely still a Slayer that plays for kills and openings, but it's pretty self-dependent. Now if you compare it to something like Carbon Roller, Carbon Roller has to play around sharking a lot more in map control. It plays a lot more along presence and a threat of a kill. It doesn't really paint for itself at all, and it's more dependent on its teammates painting in. These lead to two different kinds of frontliners. They both have the same goal, but they both play differently. That's the examples I want to get here. Roles can be played differently. Alright, with all that being said, if we were to talk to someone who has no introduction to the competitive scene, doesn't know what roles are, and we give them just the information I've said so far, and then show them K-Shot's kit, and I ask them, what role do you think K-Shot is? Now, for people who are more known in the scene, you're probably just going to instantly jump and say frontline, because splatter shots are played by a lot of frontline. They're known as being a frontline weapon. But let's look at that checklist that we said for support. It paints around very well. It gets a global special very fast that it can use for support. It has a bomb for poking. It has high mobility. It has everything that these other support weapons I mentioned before does. It's actually very little different from a Zap. So, what is it? It can still definitely play slaying-wise. It can play for kills and opportunities. So is it a frontline or is it a support? This is a hybrid weapon of two different roles. There aren't that many because in order to be a hybrid of two different roles, you need to be able to play both roles effectively enough. But this is one of those weapons. It can be played as a support or a frontline depending on how you play the weapon. It fits the characteristics of being able to do both. Actually, one of the most prolific shot players in the scene is Shaq, who plays for FT Win, one of the most strongest NA teams, and teams in the Western scene in general. And he plays a mix of both front and support K-Shot and has found a lot of success with it. Being a hybrid weapon is actually a really good thing. It gives you a lot more adaptability. If playing against certain comps requires you to be more supportive, you can. If playing against others requires to be more aggressive, you can adapt. So being able to do multiple roles is a great advantage. Another example would be H3. H3 has a lot of attributes of a kind of crossfire type of weapon. It has good damage with main power-up, but it can still get a solid special. It has good paint, but it has also good mid-range pressure. So it's kind of that supportive hybrid of being kind of like pokey and zoney while also being able to paint for special, even if it doesn't get it as fast as other weapons because it's 220. But it also has a threatening 2-shot with MPU and a 1-shot if you can land the whole burst. So it can kind of play kind of like a K-Pro in some instances, a frontline weapon that also plays off a 3-shot. It's a lot harder to do it, but it can. so this weapon in many ways can be played in terms of a midline between support and Slayer. Basically, some weapons feel like they fit two different roles, and if you feel like you can't label it, it might be because you can't label it. It might fit different roles. There are other shooters that I like this too. I won't go into depth, but Overwatch has a team shooter that assigns many different roles. Heroes to have tank, support, and DPS, but many heroes in these roles has attributes in the others. Mei is a survivability like a tank, even though they're a DPS. Roadhog is a damage output that plays for kills, but he's still a tank. So definitely having roles that can overlap and merge with the others is something that's pretty common. Lastly, I want to talk about two different notes. First of all, kits are very important in determining what role you play and how much value you get. The reason K-Shot can work as a midline support hybrid, but T-Tech can't, is because K-Shot has a supportive kit with a global special and 180p missiles, while T-Tech has a 200p inkjet, a slaying special. The kits weapons have can be very important to determining what role they can play most effectively. If H3 was 180p for armor, it probably wouldn't play as aggressively as it does now, because playing supportive would be much more effective. Overall, this also determines how some weapons are good. If Junior didn't have bombs to poke with, it would be way weaker, so the idea that it has Junior bombs and it has a larger ink tank allows it to play its role more effectively. Kits are a very important factor in how weapons are played in its specific role. It can also determine the other end why some kits suck. Let's go into one of those. So, we can take a look at Clash here. Why isn't this Clash kit good? Because Clash is a frontline that has to play in close range, and Stingray is a backline special that plays at a distance. This special and this main weapon completely contradict each other, and they don't have any synergy, so the kit ruins the role it wants to play. However, if you turn it around and slap this kit on a charger, now it's absolutely perfect and fits the backline role properly. So kits can have a big influence on how a weapon plays and how good it is, and a bad kit is one that often clashes with the role it's supposed to be playing. Overall, weapon roles can be a really complicated thing, mostly because unlike other games, there isn't really a clear role system. It's up to interpretation, and these things can change all the time, but at the end of the day, it's a good thing. It allows weapons to be more adaptable, comps to be more differential, and teams to be able to play differently. It gives more options in how things are played. Everyone has a certain playstyle they want, and being able to find the weapons that fit the right role for it is a really important thing for you. So, I hope this helps you understand roles, and I hope this helps you understand the game. If you want to look for weapons, I hope this also helps you find it. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.